Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing the starter on this 2007 Toyota Tundra. This is the 5.7 engine. Something that I want to mention about removing this starter is in the instructions, it recommends removing the exhaust manifold on the passenger side. It's very common when you remove exhaust manifolds to break some hardware along the way. So for me personally, I'm going to attempt to do this without actually removing the manifold. Something else to mention when you're removing the starter is you're going to have an issue if you have four-wheel drive on this, because of course you have the differential and an axle that's going to be in the way. If you have the two-wheel drive model, well, your job's going to be a little bit easier. Aside from that, one last thing, you're going to have some coolant involved. We're going to have to take off two coolant hoses. Some people will say to go ahead and drain out all of your coolant. For me personally, I just carefully remove the hoses and then plug them with something very quickly. Some coolant will come out, so you want to make sure you have a nice collection bucket, but also make sure that you have some nice fresh coolant to add at the end. So let's get started. Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on replacing our starter is to come right over here and relieve our negative battery terminal. Now ours has a hole set up on top of it that's for a plowing system. Typically what you would do is you just come down and loosen up the terminal end directly from the battery. For me personally, I have a little wing nut up on the top here, so I'm just going to break that free and remove the wiring from the battery. Set that aside. Set this aside. Make sure nothing's making contact with the battery terminal. Next, let's move over to the dipstick right here. We're going to go ahead and remove the dipstick from the tube, and then we're going to remove the tube from the engine. To remove the tube from the engine, you're going to go ahead and remove this bolt right down here along the passenger side of the engine. I'm going to use my extension with a swivel. Go ahead and remove this bolt down here. There it is. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do is safely raise and support the front of the truck so the wheels are off the ground. I want to remove the passenger side wheels so we're going to have access to what we need to get to. So now with it up off the ground, what I want to pay attention to is this area right here. In between the axle and the frame, you're going to be able to come right up and you'll be able to find the dipstick tube leading into the engine. We need to go ahead and spray that down with some penetrant, wiggle it around, and remove it from the engine. Once you have it out of the engine, clean and inspect the O-ring gasket on it. If it looks like it's damaged, you need to make sure you replace that. Let's get this right out of the way. Now up inside the wheel well, we want to go ahead and remove the splash guard that's going to be right here. Ours is missing, but there's a couple little push clips that you can just go ahead and remove and then remove it. Now once you remove that splash shield, we're going to pay attention to the manifold. You're going to find a big old metal shield on it. Ours is missing as well, but there's going to be three mounting bolts. One here, one up this way, and then one on the front of the control arm up there. So now we're going to get underneath the truck and we're going to start dealing with the coolant aspect of this. These hoses that lead right along here to the transmission are coolant hoses. So to remove these hoses, the first thing that I want to do is remove the bracket that's right up here. There's going to be one mounting bolt that you can remove from the side of the transmission. Once that's out, we're going to come right over here, remove both of these clamps, and then we're going to drain out what remaining coolant is inside there into a bucket. The next thing we're going to remove is these two hoses. I'm going to start with one of them. As I remove it, some coolant's going to come out, so make sure you have your collection bucket under there. Take one of these 3/8 extensions and put the wider end inside the hose and then go ahead and clamp it right on there. That's going to help restrict the flow of the coolant so you don't lose it all. Now I'm going to use a pick to get in between the hose and the cooler area here. Just work my way around to help break it free, and then we'll slide it off. If you have some of these hose crimpers, I'm just going to put it on there for good measure. We're going to carefully slide this off of here. Coolant will probably come out, so be careful. Now that we have both those lines loose, the next thing that we want to do is start removing the mounting bolts that hold the starter to the transmission. You're going to find one located right here with the yellow crayon on it. The other one's going to be located up a little bit higher right here. Remove the pair. I'm going to start by removing the upper bolt. Do the lower bolt. Now with both of the mounting bolts out of there, the next thing that I want to do is separate the starter from the transmission. So now that we have the starter broken free, it dropped down a little bit. We're gonna get back up inside the wheel well. The next thing we wanna do is remove our 3 bolts that hold our heat shield to the starter. There's one up in here, one down there, and then one up towards the front there. There's one. Do the same to the other 2. Now we're just gonna go ahead and grab onto this shield. We're gonna work at it and remove it from the truck. Perfect. Now that we have the shield off, we need a little bit more slack coming from the wiring that comes from the starter. So if you just go ahead and follow it down along where it runs alongside of the engine, you're gonna find a mounting bolt right here. Let's go ahead and remove that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is come in between the differential and the frame again, and I'm going to come up to this little cover that's covering the wiring that leads to the starter itself. Let's just go ahead and separate that right there, and then we'll remove the nut that's behind it. Now up in between the manifold tubes there, I want to reach on through and I'm going to try to remove that last wire. You're going to find a little push tab on that. Go ahead and squeeze it and then remove the wire from the starter. Now at this point, if you have a 2-wheel drive Tundra, you're going to be able to just slide your starter right out of there. For me personally, I have a 4-wheel drive Tundra, so there's a couple more steps that I'm going to have to do. Let's get into it. So we're going to have to get the axle out of the way so we can slide the starter down and out. To do that, I'm going to have to pop this upper ball joint free. But before I do that, I need to make sure that I have plenty of slack from my ABS wire and my brake hose. Let's continue on by removing this bolt right here. Now we're going to come up here, remove our safety clip. Take that nut, start it on there, just a couple threads. Now we're going to carefully hit along this area here to try to break this free. Now the next thing we want to do is get up on top of the control arm here. You could try removing this bolt, but typically it breaks off. For me personally, what I like to do is just go ahead and bend these a little bit so I can remove the ABS wire from its bracket. Now we're also going to need some slack from our ABS wire, so I'm going to come right here to this clip right here and release it. Now I'm just going to slowly let this up, and then we'll carefully bring down our knuckle. As we do this, we want to make sure that we're not putting any pressure on our ABS wire all the way down to the ABS sensor, and of course we're not going to put a big tug on this hose right here. I'm just going to carefully lay this down. I still have plenty of slack from both of these, so let's continue. Now from underneath the truck, we're going to continue on by bonking on the axle, trying to drive it out of the front differential here. We just want it to come out far enough that we can maneuver it, and we have more access to be able to remove our starter. Make sure you put a nice collection bucket underneath this to catch the gear oil. I'm just going to finagle this starter, so hopefully we can slide it out of here. There it is, friends. Now that we have the starter out, the next thing that we want to do is continue on by cleaning up our terminal end here. You want to make sure that you don't have any corrosion or rust or anything on there. Also, on the smaller wire, you're going to want to make sure that that doesn't have any corrosion as well. This one actually looks really good, so let's get ready to clean these up and then install it. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new starter. Now that we have the wires cleaned and we have the starter up and in there, let's continue on by putting the axle back into the differential. Okay, that just slid into the differential there. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a nice tug. We want to make sure that it's completely secured. After that, we're going to come right up here to this upper ball joint. We'll line it up, start the nut on there, and then we'll snug it up. Okay, now we'll snug this up and then we'll torque it to 81 foot-pounds. To line it up, what you want to do is make sure that you tighten it until the very next slot, until the next one's lined up. Now let's re-secure this. We've got a little piton here. We want to make sure that that fits into the knuckle. Line up that bolt hole, start it in, and then we'll snug it up. Okay, let's follow that ABS wire down. We're going to re-secure it down here as well. Let's follow the ABS wire up now, put it into its mounting points up along here. Once it's in, I'm just going to kind of pin this over. Just enough so it's secure, but we don't want to damage the wire. Do the same to the other one. Now with the starter being close to being in position, the next thing that we want to do is start installing our wires. I'm going to start with the small wire here. We'll get that connected and then we'll do the larger wire. Okay, that one just slid in. I heard a nice click. I'm going to give it a little tug just to ensure that it's definitely on there. And now we'll get the big wire on there. It needs to go further. Yeah. Now we'll start that nut on there and then we'll snug it up. Just going to make sure that's nice and snug now. Okay, that's perfect. Put on that little black cover. Now it's time to get our shield back on the starter. I have one bolt hole lined up, so I'll just go ahead and start in that bolt, and we'll do the same to the others. Okay, so now with the starter still loose, I put in all of the mounting bolts for that shield. With them all in there, let's go ahead and snug them up, and then we'll move along. Okay, now we can start in our two mounting bolts. Once they're both started, we'll go ahead and snug them up and torque them to manufacturer's specification. Now I'm going to torque these two bolts to 27 foot-pounds. Now our next step is to go ahead and put the coolant lines on here. Before we do that though, you want to pay attention to the area that it's going to get mounted to. If yours looks like mine does, you need to make sure you clean off all this. Let's get the upper hose on here. Put the clamp up, tighten it up. And then of course we'll do the same to the lower. Now that we have the coolant lines reconnected, let's go ahead and put in the mounting bolt for the bracket. We'll start that in and snug it up as well. Maybe. Now that we have those coolant tubes reattached, let's go ahead and put on the shield for the manifold. Like I said before, ours is missing, but go ahead and slide it right inside here, put in all of your mounting bolts, and then snug them up. Once you have the exhaust shield on, continue on by installing your dipstick. I'm just going to line it up with the hole. Okay, so now that we have everything back together, the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and put my shield back up across here. We want to make sure that this is sealed off. Obviously, ours doesn't particularly have one. We have to order it. After that, we're going to get under the truck and check our differential fluid. So now to fill the differential, what you would want to do is come right up along the driver's side. Next to the axle, you're going to be able to find the fill plug right here. When you fill it, you're going to want to use 7585 GL5. When you fill it, you want to make sure it just barely comes up to the bottom of the fill plug hole and starts trickling out. You don't need to go any higher than that. Now we'll go ahead and get the wheel on here, start all of our lug nuts, and then we'll torque it once we get it on the ground. Now with the wheel just barely touching the ground, the next thing we want to do is torque these lug nuts. Now there's going to be options for this. If you have aluminum wheels like I have here, you're going to torque these to 97 foot-pounds. If you have steel wheels, like as if you had a magnet, you could stick it right to it, you're going to torque those to 154. Torqued. Now the next thing we want to do is get back under the hood and we're going to re-secure our dipstick tube here. Go ahead and line it up, start your bolt in there and snug it up. Just make sure it's nice and secure. Grab your dipstick and slide it in. All right, let's go reconnect our battery. So now, like I said, when we were removing this, typically you would just go ahead and loosen this and remove the whole assembly right here. For us in particular, we have a whole bunch of extra stuff, but essentially just reconnect your negative battery terminal. Double check it, make sure it's nice and tight.